Okay, go ahead.
All right. I am happy to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Bruce Hough. He and I are, those of you who know that I always am talking about Coeur d'Alene, Bruce and I grew up together in Coeur d'Alene, and he's gone on to some really great things, and I'm glad to be able to introduce him. In 1993, Bruce co-founded and was president of Publicity, held I need my glasses on so I can read. I forget. I am getting old. Sorry. Nutris. How do you pronounce that? Nutriceric.
Or you could actually forego the introduction, and I'll just give a quick synopsis if you like.
Oh, that would probably be even better. But just to remind those who just joined us, we are giving a prize at the end of Bruce's remarks. If you would like, please keep yourself muted during his time. If you have questions, put them in the chat, and I will convey them to Bruce. And at the end, we'll have a prize. If you've listened to all three all day, we have a cash prize at the end. So with that, Bruce, I'll turn the time over to you.
First of all, I want to know, are the speakers eligible for the prizes? Just asking.
Oh, sure.
Just kidding. So two things. First, to just start off, there was about a 2% drop off from Corinne to my speaking, so I'm a little concerned. But number two, I noticed that everybody's on non-video. Now, when you speak to a group, it's great to see people's faces. And I know some of you have still photos of yourself, which are lovely. Thankfully, there's no boudoir photography up there, but it's great to see a live group. If people are really engaged, from when we do Zoom meetings with people, when I'm dealing on a business perspective, I always insist that everybody be live, because if you're not, that means that you're probably doing something else and not really listening. Now, that's your choice, and obviously you feel free to do whatever you like, but I'd love to see your faces. Number two, I don't know if you just saw the announcement, but oh my gosh, the Utah Jazz are being sold. The Millers are selling it to Ryan Smith from Qualtrics. And that just got announced just moments ago, and that's a big deal for everybody in this state. I just thought I would share that since you're on this call and nobody's actually looking at their messages or any of their other things. So just a quick thing about myself. I've lived in Utah since 1978, and as Carrie said, I did grow up in North Idaho in a beautiful town called Coeur d'Alene. I still have a place in the lake up there. It is, I've been there the last couple of weeks. I've spent a lot of time during the pandemic up there and enjoyed it very, very much. I have self-quarantined on the lake. So that's been a fun thing to do. But that growing up period did inform my life a lot. I had parents that taught me to work and basically to buck up and to just do stuff. And so I was really, really fascinated by the anti-fragility discussion that Corinne just had with us, and really appreciated her thoughts on that, because I do feel like sometimes generationally we haven't done for our children, and maybe you're not doing for our grandchildren, what our parents did for us, which was basically teach us this idea of hardiness and self-reliance and resilience and those kinds of things. And so any of that can be done, I think, to encourage our next generation to have those attributes, I think is important. I spent a couple of years in Latin America as a missionary, which I enjoyed thoroughly, and really came to love the people of that region, and continue to speak Spanish and try to do business in Spanish as much as I can, and both domestically and abroad. I enjoy the international scene, and the company that Carrie was talking about, which was Nutraceutical Corporation, which we started in 1993 here in Park City, Utah. We ended up selling in over 80 countries and engaging with our customers in a global manner. We became public in 1998, and we were just sold a couple of years ago to a private equity firm. And so I'm what we might say, I'm currently gainfully unemployed. I seem to be working a lot, but not getting paid for it. So a lot of it has to do with some of the charitable work that I do. One of which is an organization called Mentors International. And we just had a gala, virtual gala recently, and it was very successful. My son and I had a chance to MC that virtually. And here's something interesting. During this pandemic, many nonprofits I know have suffered greatly because people have really tried to pull back. I would say that I'm not trying to overstate it, but Mentors International has done a phenomenal job of responding to this pandemic and has become extraordinarily effective with the resources they have, and it has not slowed the organization down one bit. And so it can be done. It's just my message there. My early career was actually in broadcasting and advertising, and later I started a satellite communications company that was really a pioneer in that industry. It tells you how old I am, because being a pioneer means that I was at the very beginning of that industry. And you have your hand up and want to ask a question, Karen.
Bruce, I was just going to tell you, your audio is just a little bit rough for us, and I don't know if we can maybe fix that just a little. I'm not sure what it is, but you're kind of breaking up a little, and it'd be nice to hear you a little clearer.
I'm going to do something to fix it maybe here. How's that?
That would be great.
Okay, is that better?
Let's see, talk just for a second and we'll see.
Okay, now I can't hear you, so now I need to probably put headphones on.
We can hear you very clearly. Okay, can you hear me now? Much better. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll use these earbuds, even though they don't stay in very well, because otherwise the headphones look gigantic and I look like Mickey Mouse. But, okay, we're getting back organized. Okay, here we go. So anyway, I was just saying that in the satellite communications industry, which was it was actually a very sexy business, because it was all brand new. We got to do the first in every manner in sports and news, all the things that you just take for granted now when you see television. And so it's a very interesting an interesting business. I also spent a little time in politics and have been on a city council, have been involved in national politics and local politics as well. Let me see if I can share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, and let me just get, let's see. I can't see what you see. You probably see all of my thumbnails and my notes, right?
Yep, that's what we see.
So let me try to fix that. One of the things about being as old as I am is that you're still trying to figure out how to do this. I always had people who did this for me, so now I have to do it myself. But let me
go to,
I think you just go to slideshow.
I'm just, there we go.
Yeah.
And
Yep, there you are.
okay, except I still need to figure out how to see my notes. All right. Sorry for this delay, ladies and gentlemen. And for some reason, it's now recording everything that I'm saying. All right, maybe we'll do this different. So who's an expert on here who can make this work a little differently? That is not working the way we want it to work. So
Yeah, when you're not the one that's used to being in charge of that you have an IT person, you don't even think about it.
yeah,
Is anyone on our call?
I'm just trying to figure out the. All right. Well, let's. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my other screen, and so since I am using two screens, everything I'm saying is being recorded, which is really weird too. It's very distracting. So I've never had this happen before. I've done this before, and for some reason, this is really creating a problem. Well, all right. Okay, so I'm sorry about this, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe we should choose a prize for our next. Okay. Well, I think we'll just have to go with what I've got here then, and we'll just deal with it. I just don't know how to. There's got to be a way to pull that
Bruce?
off there.
Bruce,
Yeah,
do you have two screens?
I do, but the one screen is my camera screen, so that's part of my problem.
Probably why. I just Googled it because I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move ahead. Let's just imagine for a second that you're on Mount Everest and you're in the death zone. That means that you're in an area where every step you take, you're literally dying as you approach the summit of Mount Everest. You have a report and understand that bad weather's coming in, and you've already decided as a leader of your expedition that there's a certain time that is just a non-negotiable where you have to turn around if you're going to safely return to your encampment. And you're up there and the weather starts to change. And one of your clients is talking to you and saying, look, this is my second time. I cannot not summit. I have to do this. I've saved all my money from being a mailman. It's my second time. It's very expensive. I just have to finish this. And you're the leader and you're up against your time restriction. You have weather coming in. What do you do? That's 1996, a real scenario. In 1915, you're the leader of an expedition to cross the last unexplored continent of Antarctica. And your ship becomes frozen and you aren't quite sure what you can do because now you can't move, now you can't navigate, and you're nowhere near land. And now the ice itself is pushing you further out to sea. What do you do? And then it's 2020 and there's a global pandemic and you are trying to figure out what that means for your life, for your family, and for your business. and what do you do? It's one of those things where we can historically look at these incredible, really incredible moments in time and realize that you have literally no understanding of what these people did in 1915 or even in 1996, because you've never had that dramatic experience in your life. And now all of a sudden you are literally having to make that decision because you're in a pandemic. Can you see my screen or not? No? Okay, let me, I'm going to go back and do this another way then real quick, because you kind of need to see the screen. And for some reason, oh, I see what happened. Okay. Okay. So today, Carrie asked if I'd talk a little bit about powering the road to revival, strategy, skill, and leadership. And that's sort of a daunting task. There's a lot in that phrase, and let's just talk a little bit about what those things mean. When we talk about power, that's to direct something with great force, move with a great speed or force. And if you're in an automobile, of course, you'd like the idea of having something that, especially if you're towing something with great force, or if you're driving between the South County and St. George, something with great speed. The idea of revival is the idea of improving on the condition or strength of something. And in this pandemic, a lot of us were in a situation where things are going along very well, and then the bottom just dropped out. Others have actually done okay, but I think everyone is looking at what is going to happen post-pandemic. And even if and how long is it going to last? And if it's going to last for much longer, what can I do to revive what I've had or to make it stronger? A strategy is a pretty simple definition of a plan of action or policy designed to achieve a major overall aim. So when we think about overall aim, that's where we're headed. That's the outgrowth of our mission and our values. Skill is really competency. This is the ability to do something well, to have expertise. And of course, leadership is the action of leading a group of people or an organization. And of course, when I grew up, I was always told that you should never use the word that you're defining in your definition. So let's maybe go to the next slide for a moment and look at what Indra Nooyi, who's the former chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, said. Leadership is hard to define, and good leadership even harder, but if you can get people to follow you to the ends of the earth, you are a great leader. I would submit that the one vital skill, the one indispensable skill in this time of robotics and AI and machine learning, all these things, the one indispensable skill is leadership. I want to talk a little bit about going to the ends of the earth and a pandemic. I mean, the reality is that the ends of the earth for us is really the pandemic. This is not the end of the earth, but the ends of the earth in a sense. It's taking us places we've never been before. And as a consequence, it requires us to be adaptable and to try to find ways to create something good out of what's before us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the leadership traits that I think are important, not just during a pandemic or at the ends of the earth, but at any time, but are especially critical now. And so the very first one of these is good leadership. It really starts with good vision, an inspiring vision with ennobling possibilities where you can enlist others in a common view of a shared aspiration. It helps create passion that some would call a compelling saga for your company. As an individual, it may be your heroic journey. What is it that really engages and motivates people and their own reason for being? As a leader, you can give your people a role and a purpose. This must be crafted and not copied, however. and it's unique to you and your company, your employees, your customers, and other stakeholders. This is a picture of Mount Whitney that you see here. It's the tallest mountain peak in the lower 48 states. A year ago, the beginning of May, this was a shared vision by a group of us who were Gonzaga alumni, and our professor from a previous schooling, Dr. Adrian Popa, who actually is on the line. I think he's watching to make sure I don't misspeak. We found out there were some other climbers who also had a vision to climb that peak during the same we were, but we'll have more on that in a moment. A little spoiler alert, I'm going to give you right now all the rest of kind of the leadership attributes that I think are important. And then we'll see how some of those fit into the experience that I'm going to talk about. So moving forward, these are the 10 attributes that I think can power you and your organization to revival and beyond. We talked about vision already, but values is hypercritical. And clarity of values is very essential. The shared core values of your team, and also minimizing status differences within your organization, not trying to create a hierarchy that differentiates in a way that doesn't allow collaboration and sharing. Those are key values that I think are extremely important. Action. This idea of action is something that we could spend all day just talking about that. Fear, and there's been a lot of fear associated with this pandemic, that fear can literally stop action. And so we need to act decisively. You know, U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 1933 inaugural address in the midst of the Great Depression said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear ourselves." And we all remember that statement. But then he added, and this may be the more important, "There is no unsolvable problem if we face it wisely and courageously. There are many ways in which it can be helped, but it can never be helped merely by talking about it. We must act, and act quickly." And so action, and a bias for action, is extremely important. In other words, being proactive. Leadership is really about relationships. You know, the great HR myth is that people are a company's greatest asset. The reality is it's the relationships of the people that are the company's greatest asset. Relationships are everything. And this is the area that we could, again, spend all day talking just about this, because this is where you listen to understand. This is where you have empathy. This is where you search for win-win solutions. This is where your mindset really determines the way you treat people with kindness and with respect. And so relationships are super critical in terms of good leadership in an organization. And we'll have more on that as we talk about some of these examples. I like trust. In fact, Joel Peterson of Peterson Private Equity gave a speech on this at University of Utah recently. And I just finished reading his 10 Laws of Trust. Great book, because it really emphasizes how trust is so important in an organization, and how a leader is really responsible for engendering it. And it's not just during a crisis like this pandemic, but it's always, it's where and how you communicate truthfully about optimism and reality to create a trustworthy environment. We're going to talk more about this idea of optimism and reality, but think about those two words as we think about trust. Winston Churchill encouraged his people to keep the faith on the eve of World War II. He said, "We shall not fail or falter. We shall not weaken or tire. Neither the sudden shock of battle nor the long-drawn trials of vigilance and exertion will wear us down. Give us the tools and we will finish the job." It was really important at that moment in history for the people to trust Winston Churchill, because the previous prime minister had basically resigned after capitulating to Hitler. And it was, okay, what kind of leader are we going to have now? What's going to happen? Are we going to have our country in the future? And so trust was a huge aspect of that change of prime ministers. Being an example or modeling the way, as Posner and Kuza says in their book on the leadership challenge. This is modeling the way of behavior and setting an example through humility, courage, hardiness, and resilience. And it pays huge dividends in an organization when the person who is leading is actually setting the example, who is actually modeling the behavior. And this, again, goes to how you can choose. One of my favorite authors has always been Viktor Frankl since I was a freshman in college. I read it in the lunch line at Rick's College, paperback, and it really informed my life in a way that I continue to draw upon. In that, he talks about how we have the choice. We get to choose our response. He talks about the stimulus. Now, that stimulus could be anything from somebody's words or actions. And between that stimulus and our response, there's a space. And thankfully, there's that space because we get to choose to use that space to decide how we're going to respond. And sometimes it's a nanosecond, but sometimes we need to take a deep breath and make that choice. And so when we're setting an example and we are in a situation where we now need to choose our response, we have that opportunity to say, you know what, that person may have been rude to me, but I can respond with kindness. I can respond with respect. I can respond in a way that does not diminish our relationship. And so I think that's a very critical aspect, being an example as the leader. Leaders are risk takers. They take the big risks. That's what differentiates a leader from a lot of people is are they willing to take the risks? And obviously they make preparation and do things to mitigate risk, but they're willing to do it. And in this pandemic, there's been a lot of companies who have taken the risk to pivot to a completely different direction, to make decisions that are completely separate from maybe even their core business. And so it's a great opportunity to, in a crisis, to see if we're up to that task. The next one is fun. Dennis Perkins, who wrote about an experience we'll share here in a minute, talked about tenacious creativity. This is challenging the status quo, experimentation, innovation, anything to improve the process, and a bias toward learning and curiosity. I love that Corinne talked about curiosity, because curiosity is such an important part of this opportunity to be a creative leader. There's always another way, and never give up. Even celebration is an important part. This is one that a lot of leaders, and I have to say that I'm somewhat guilty of this myself, that I have not many times stopped to take the moment to celebrate with my team or with my people, to help them understand how much they are appreciated and what is happening is recognizable as an achievement. Now, sometimes we can even celebrate our failures because by celebrating a failure, we've now decided this is a way we're not going to do something, or we're going to celebrate that knowledge and move forward. But celebrating people and finding ways to laugh and to celebrate our victories and our values by creating a spirit of community. These are things that sometimes are trivialized by great leaders, but great leaders find a way to celebrate. The last one is stamina. I've kind of thought of this in my own personal creed as fitness, but I really like the term stamina because, and we'll talk more about this at the very end, but Covey has called this, a lot of these attributes of stamina, sharpening the saw. But it's all about self-care too. It's about the leader cannot drive themselves into the ground or who will lead. They have to be healthy. They have to be strong. They have to be resilient. They have to have the stamina to move forward and to keep the organization focused and on track. So stamina, I don't want to have that diminish because it's the last, but we are going to talk about it last one more time. So Now I want you to just think about those. These are my kind of 10 for this discussion. There's lots of other things we could talk about, but kind of think about those as we look at an example of how they might have been used or not used in these examples. I mentioned that we decided to go climb Mount Whitney, and we'd spent months in preparation, conditioning, equipment, clothing, and supplies, gathering all these things, including the skills that we needed to acquire in the use of things like crampons and ice axes. There were some who'd never climbed a mountain this high, and we relied on others who had to help prepare the group. The planning included a close look at weather conditions and the terrain and the wildlife to make sure we could navigate safely during our ascent. Yeah, I mentioned wildlife because bears are prevalent there, and you have to keep your food away from your tents because it could be a disaster if you don't. Because it was winter, I say winter, it was May, but it was snowy conditions. Travel would be slower than the summer environment. So we intended to spend at least a night on the trail, but we're prepared to spend really up to 3 nights. Because of late arrivals and other issues, we knew our first day would be short, and therefore we pivoted to deciding on a 2-night stay on the mountain. And it's interesting. I say up here that, action through preparation and learning from others who modeled their experience are attributes that helped us get to this point. And I love the quote by Walt Disney, who said, "The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing." There is a time to prepare, and then there is a time to do, and it was a time to do on May 2nd of this last year, a year ago May. We didn't see hardly anybody on the trail as we were moving up the snow path that we were creating until we stopped mid-morning to refresh supplies of water. There was a little pond, and you can see it there on the left, and one of our compatriots there. And we knew we wouldn't have ready access to water at our upper camp. And so we had decided to get some water and to make sure that we were well supplied. And when we were there, we had some people come by, the 3 pictured here, that stopped to converse with us. They had just started up that morning. We had spent the night earlier down lower on the mountain. And we noticed a couple of things. First of all, we asked them if they wanted us to filter some water for them to fill their bottles. They declined, said they had sufficient. They were intending to climb up and back the same day, which in the summer is hard, but it's done regularly. And they were going to try and do it in the snow. We noticed that one of the parties was wearing jeans, another was wearing a light jacket and summer hiking boots. The leader, the one pictured in the cowboy hat, he seemed to be the most prepared. He at least carried a pack instead of a small knapsack, a day pack. And then he also, oddly, was carrying about a 10-pound stone between his the belt of his pack and his belly. And I asked him, I said, "So why are you carrying that heavy stone?" It was at least 10 pounds, maybe 12 pounds. And he says, "Well, I have a tradition that at the bottom of a mountain, I pick up a rock and I carry it with me to the summit, and then I bring it home, and it's a recognition of my achievement." And I said to him, I says, "Well," I said, "I think I could do that with a much smaller rock." And he says, "Yeah, but what would the challenge of that be?" And so anyway, it was kind of an interesting dynamic and exchange that we had there. And they proceeded on ahead of us, and we continued to carry our heavy packs with tents and food and supplies up to our camp spot up above. It was a beautiful day while we're hiking. We really didn't have any weather issues per se. Yes, in the daytime it was warm at times, but it also there was wind, and there was at night, of course, it was very, very cold. But as we walked, we could see those mountain peaks ahead of us. We could see that shared vision. It was inspiring. It was ennobling. And during that hiking, relationships were strengthened with shared challenges and helping others, serving others. And so there was a great opportunity to serve that made for a collaborative and more successful and enjoyable experience. We all have a primitive brain that is selfish. We need to unhook our selfishness by engaging in something worth fighting for, something we can be passionate about. And when we share that passion, it makes it that much more fulfilling. We need to be continually ready to adapt and use language and actions that inspire others. So encouragement on the trail is a big deal. When people get tired or it just starts to be too much, it's a great opportunity to show that encouraging heart. The pandemic is a perfect opportunity to pivot and to adapt, but should be done in a hopefully optimistic manner, tempered with reality. But that transparency will engender trust in you, your organization, and just as if you were on the mountain. You know, we have to be realistic about how hard it is, but we want to be optimistic about what we can achieve together. We got to our upper camp and we had a nice meal and we rested and we awoke early so that we could climb the chute while the snow was still very firm and we could get up the side of the mountain much more effectively. A short way up, we noticed a small day pack in the middle of the beginning of the chute climb. We thought perhaps it was someone who had departed before us and was, you know, taking advantage of a trip to nature off the beaten path. The bag was open. There was a sweater in there. There was a bottle of water with about third full. And then we continued our ascent. Still a little bit curious about why we found that little day pack there, but we just kept moving one step at a time. And when you're climbing, and you can see how steep it is there. This is the chute, but in the summertime, it's called the Trail of the 99 Switchbacks. If any of you have done that, you know that that is a rigorous climb. And so you do your climber step, you set your foot, you step, you lock your leg and get your firm footing and bring your next foot up, get a firm foothold and lock it and do that sort of lock step, and always have your axe ready in case of a bad slip. But during this ascent up to the main saddle just before the summit, there was a lot of communication among the team. Some people would take the lead. Some people would help navigate. Everybody shared in the role of their ascent. When we arrived to the saddle before the summit, a couple of members of the group called down to me and said, in fact, it was Dr. Popa, he said, "Bruce, do you still have the sat phone with you? Did you bring it with you?" And I did, and I was a little worried that maybe somebody had gotten injured after they got up there. They got up there ahead of me because I was the old slow guy. But I got up there and my worries about our team being injured were not true, but our team had discovered two members of the trio we had seen at the pond the day before, and they had spent the night on the mountain in a very exposed environment. They had very little clothing or other gear. They had really no food or water. And even more desperate was one of the young men. You'll see him there sitting next to the person in the red. I'm in the brown jacket, sitting down, and the one with the little blue cap underneath the down jacket was a young Indian grad student from Stanford. He had spent a miserable night on the mountain with his Midwestern friend, and when we found him, he was in advanced stages of hypothermia. His summer boots had become soaked because they had gone up in the afternoon of the day before and were wet, and had now become literally blocks of ice. And you can see that he had only had a light jacket, and our team went into the mode of selfless serving. They gave him a coat, they gave him gloves, they provided another coat to put around him and to sit on. We took his boots off and his socks off, and the picture you're seeing there is his feet. His bare feet are in the armpits, my armpits underneath my jacket, and they were there for almost an hour and a half. he was in deep trouble. You know, after the trio had left us the day before, they'd reached the chute in the mid to late afternoon. Their leader thought that the other two should leave their knapsacks behind to make the climb of the chute easier. The young man from India was already exhausted, but they made a plan to be at the saddle by a certain time. And if they were there by a certain time, they would summit. If they didn't meet that time restraint, then they would turn around and go back. It did take them much longer than they had thought to get to the saddle because of the exhaustion of the young Indian student. But by the time they got to the saddle, the time had already passed for them to return. But the leader indicated he still wanted to go to a summit. Now, they were too far to get to the summit of Mount Whitney, but just before the actual summit of Mount Whitney is another summit called Mount Muir. And so he took off and decided he was going to go do that, leaving his two companions kind of wondering, wait a minute, we're supposed to be heading back now. It's going to be dark soon. We need to get off this mountain. Needless to say, he was unsuccessful in his climb of Mount Muir. In fact, he decided to take a shortcut, which required some free climbing, and he fell. He injured his shoulder and ended up on a cliff that was quite precarious. You can see in the circle where he was. His companions were calling out to him to turn back and that getting that rock to the summit was not that important under the circumstances. But now it was too late for their leader and for them to do anything. They could not reach him. The two companions decided to descend the mountain to get help because he was injured and he couldn't get off that ledge and no one could reach him. But by the time they reached the saddle, it was dark and their attempt to descend without the proper tools proved foolhardy, and they resolved to hunker down and spend the night. They tried to shield themselves from the wind and embraced each other for warmth, but the young Indian fellow fell into physical and emotional despair, pleading with his companion to tell his family he loved them. He did not expect to survive. When our party found him, his eyes had rolled back and he was not coherent. In the meantime, the leader spent an uncomfortable night on the ledge and did not sleep at all for fear he would fall to his death. He did have some water and warmer clothing, however, because he was carrying a backpack. He might have been better off a little bit, but not so much. Would his team or friends been better off if the leader put their needs in front of his own personal desires? Of course. Can you imagine how humbling that would be and how much more satisfying the whole experience would become if he had? This is a perfect example of what Warner and Schmenke call DUD behavior. In their book on leadership, using mountain climbing as a metaphor, they refer to dangerous, unproductive, dysfunctional behavior. DUD, dangerous, unproductive, dysfunctional behavior. It can exist in your organization and exists in probably most organizations. Things like protecting sacred cows, blaming others, avoiding accountability, backstabbing, political maneuvering, CYA maneuvers, protection of silos, turf wars, hidden agendas, taking credit for others' work or ideas, trashing others' ideas and withholding ideas and information. This is sort of an arrogance that, when you have a high opinion of your abilities in this setting where they were, it could kill you. And Everest is replete with stories of hubris and failures to follow self-determined criteria for self-returns. Humility shouldn't hinder competency or destroy confidence. It should improve judgment. And so this idea of being the lone hero or the guy who gets out there and gets it done can be very selfish and ego-driven and glory-seeking. And interestingly, those folks are generally never grateful for the help that is given them. Well, the park rangers were notified by the sat phone. They sent a helicopter to check out the situation. You can kind of see it in that left picture. It was a Bell helicopter. It wasn't adequate, however, to save the young man off extract him off that cliff. So the rangers stayed. They were let off by that chopper and stayed to kind of help assess the situation, help those get down the mountain and figure out what else to do. By this time, you can see our hypothermic climber was in pretty good spirits. It had been almost 5 hours, I think, since we had found him, and by the time the Rangers had got there. However, he about went back into a catatonic state when the Rangers told him there would not be a helicopter there to pick him up and take him down. He would have to hike down himself. He just about broke down in tears when he was told that. In the meantime, it was determined they had to bring a Sikorsky helicopter out of Seattle to get the other person off the cliff. That would take some time. And in the meantime, they said to us, would we help take these other two climbers down and in our group? That was going to be difficult because they didn't have the proper footwear. They didn't have the tools. They didn't have the proper equipment. And so it was difficult. What had occurred during this time was other people had gotten to the saddle, and we had a number of our team who had actually finished the summit while we took care of those who needed help. And when they came back, they reported that there was an area of treacherous pathway in the snow because the sun had made the snow so soft that it was extremely dangerous and treacherous. There was two men who had come up just as our team came back and reported that, and they said one of them was a very experienced climber. He was an Air Force pilot, and he talked to his companion who was a novice climber and looked right at him and said, "We will not be summiting today." And I thought, what an interesting juxtaposition between leadership styles. Here you had these two men, one very experienced and one with a novice. And he basically made an immediate decision, thinking of the other person's well-being first and saying, we're not going to summit today because it's too treacherous, it's too dangerous. And juxtaposed to the other where there was this idea that summiting at all costs was more important than even the well-being of his companions. This was, for me, a very interesting comparison of how people lead other people. This is us going down the chute. In the beginning, we were going down on foot, and then it was decided, hey, you know what? This is a perfect glissading chute. Now, if you don't know what glissading is, first of all, it's a heck of a lot of fun. But you sort of get down onto your rear end, but you have an ice axe that you use to control your speed. And you are very careful about the way you do it so that you don't hurt yourself. But it can be done, and it can be a lot of fun, and it can make the trip going down very, very quick. It was very soon that our Midwestern hiker, who was pretty hardy and pretty resilient, he was all game and ready to do it. And before I knew it, everybody had gone down and glissaded, leaving me with my friend who had had his feet in my armpits for a couple of hours. And he panicked. He literally grabbed me around my torso and would not let go because he was not going to try to slide down this. Even with me, I even tried to get him to train down with me, and he wouldn't do that. So I literally had to go one step at a time. It was very interesting, though, because it taught me a lot about patience. It taught me a lot about encouraging another person, but with resolve, managing their energy and their emotions. And that created for a very good relationship, and one that actually exists today. That was a very bonding experience to go down that very steep incline in that manner. We were lucky to have our two Air Force friends, new friends, who took these two hikers down while the rest of us struck our camp, packed up so that we could make it down the mountain before dark. It's interesting because there are a lot of people who think that some gave up on reaching the summit and that sort of thing. And, walking away is not giving up. It's pivoting. It's looking at the circumstance and making a decision to take a different action. And different action is not better or worse. It's just different. And I think Corinne talked a little bit about that as well. Well, we made it down. We had a great opportunity to celebrate the values and victories by creating a spirit of community. We had a nice dinner that night in Lone Pine, and it gave us a chance to lighten up and to laugh and to think, because it was a pretty serious trip that last day. Now, many of you may have thought that the vision that our team had was to summit the mountain, Mount Whitney. Now, we looked at that and it was a motivating force to look at that beautiful peak. But that wasn't actually our vision. Our vision and shared vision and aspiration was to return safely. And so when you think about that, sometimes what seems to be the obvious destination or vision isn't the real one. Make sure you identify what the real one is so that you don't make the mistake of proceeding forward in a situation that you should in fact pivot and move a different direction. The other part of our vision was to encourage and help our companions to achieve what was possible for them in an ever-changing environment. So let's look at one more example of the ends of the earth. This is one of the great stories of the 20th century. Ernest Shackleton, Britain's explorer, led a 1914 expedition to be the first to cross Antarctica, having just missed being the first to reach the South Pole by a mere 97 miles. In 1909, Shackleton decided to navigate the continent because Norwegian Roald Amundsen had already reached the South Pole in 1911. So he had tried in 1909, failed, but learned a lot. And when Amundsen was successful in 1911, he says, well, I have another goal. I have another vision. And here was the vision. He put a wanted ad, men wanted ad in his in the newspaper in London. Just read what this says. Men wanted for hazardous journeys, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. I like the way he says in case of success, like it's almost like just in case we're successful, you could get some nice recognition out of this deal. I think he began his leadership with absolute trust by telling the truth, being transparent, and being realistic about what was ahead of them. I thought it was a very interesting call to action by those who did share a vision of doing something that had never been done before. This was the Endurance, their ship under full sail that encountered more ice than expected. It became stuck in the ice, and he realized that he and his crew would have to wait out the brutal winter on a floating iceberg. He insisted, though, that each man maintain his ordinary duties. Sailors swabbed decks, scientists collected specimens, others were assigned to hunt for meat. He established routines and tasks and labored to establish order and thus ground his men in an uncertain time that was filled with danger. Isn't that interesting? I mean, you think about the pandemic today, and you think about what can we do to ground our people in an uncertain time? You know, showing that work still matters. Helping others as a leader for Shackleton was his highest priority. You know, he shared his rations. He did chores. He did all the things that his men were expected to do. Courageous leaders will make mistakes along the way and will have to pivot quickly as this happens because they're learning as they go too. And I think sometimes we have to give people the benefit of knowing that they're in a learning mode, but they are also the leader. They had to abandon their ship because the ice basically crushed it. And what could be more difficult to leave the relative comfort of their ship? And when you think about what could be the more discomforting for us than to really leave the relative comfort of our normal life, of our normal day-to-day existence in our workplace. The crew was about to understand the meaning of the risk they took on this expedition. Such a risk, and those we might need to take, will test our ability to persevere through discomfort. It is during these times that one must experiment and learn to operate in ambiguity and chaos. And that is about as much about the pandemic as we could probably say. That's why I think this is such a great corollary. Well, now living on the ice floe, the crew continued to float away from the continent, and Shackelford had to adapt to where they were and formulated plans to travel the ice over the ice, towing 3 of the lifeboats with them to approach the open sea, to give them some opportunity, some chance to navigate to an island where perhaps whalers might spot them and might, or they might find supplies that had been left by previous expeditions. Again, he was tenaciously creative and decisive. He took risks, but modeled the way by doing every job that his men were expected to do. He felt a keen responsibility to them and for them. Even when one of his men rebelled and spent 3.5 days in open defiance of Shackleton's leadership, Shackleton did not shrink, but engaged with the man, however uncomfortable it was to do so. So you think about your own organizations, and we're in a pandemic where things have changed. And having a leader who not only feels responsible to you, but for you, I think is a tremendous attribute. And even when there's, and even when there's not a pandemic, we have people who work for us who become dissident. And do we just kind of put them in the corner and give them an assignment and hope they go away? Or do we confront them? And do we make it, but confront them in a respectful and in a kind and empathetic way? I mean, sometimes the best decision is to let somebody go, to terminate their employment. And sometimes we have to because of economic conditions. But we should confront that in a way that's empathetic. And that's what a good leader does. It does it to protect the company and others within the organization from either substandard performance or from attitude or from an economic problem. They made it to a little island called Elephant Island. It really had nothing there but some birds. It didn't have enough resources to really support their entire crew. And so again, being action oriented and to save his men, he made the decision to take one of the 3 boats and to take a handful of men and try to find a location where he could find a rescue ship and come back and rescue the remainder of his crew. He gave, however, before he left each of his people a role and a purpose. So they had a job to do while they were there. He was always honest with his crew, demonstrating the courage to be brutally honest and credibly hopeful. He was a man who exemplified the values and worked to maintain good relationships with all of his men, even in the face of hardship and conflict. He acknowledged people's flaws and encouraged them with resolve. He made even room for celebration by celebrating holidays and activities that would create an opportunity for laughter and fun. He was the consummate risk taker, but was innovative and creative, challenging processes and willing to experiment and learn. This was the travels that they had. If you see the orange line, that was where the ship was stranded and then floated. And then the sort of yellow line was where they walked. And then the solid yellow was the short trip in the boat to Elephant Island. And then the blue was the 800-mile journey that Shackleton took to South Georgia Island. And when they got there, they had to walk 2 days overland over the mountains to get to the bay where there was actually human beings. He tried 3 unsuccessful times to go rescue his men. 3 times. 4th time they were successful. Not one of his men was lost. He cared so much, so deeply about his people and about the relationships he had with them and about that journey that he did everything he could. And it ended up being a remarkable experience. I encourage you to read the book. There's a number of really good books on Ernest Shackleton and great metaphors for leadership. So here are the big 10 that we talked about. I said I was going to talk a little bit more about stamina. And I guess I just need to ask all of you, do you really want to know the truth about stamina? And then I was just going to play this because it's fun. And it's not playing, but darn it, it would be really fun to hear him say, "You can't take the truth." It's Jack Nicholson. What happened to it? It's played here it is. Come on. Did you hear it? You didn't hear it. Okay, sorry. You can't handle the truth because actually the truth can be kind of tough to take sometimes. So I'm going to give you the truth about stamina. I think I am. As soon as here we go. Okay, so here's what I mean. Self-care is critical for leaders and every member of your team. Things that work include many of the things that you see on this montage here. Regular exercise, even 20 minutes a day, 3 days a week works. My fitness goal is to sweat 6 times a day. Now, I can get a sweat up in like 5 minutes. By the way, it has to be through exercise, not sitting in a sauna, but exercise. It has to be movement. Movement is very, very critical. I have a couple of my kids are involved in dance, and movement is everything for them. And it's been a great lesson for me. Eating good foods, not processed foods, but live foods, are great energy sources, and maintaining even your right weight, whatever that may be. I'm telling you to stop watching the news, at least so much. I mean, I watch it. When I'm exercising, I watch it because I don't have to think when I'm exercising. So I watch the news. Actually, I need to think about exercising. I don't need to think about the news, so I can do both at the same time. And I do skim a couple of newspapers online, but I don't spend more than 20 minutes a day at all looking at the news or that kind of information. It's way too negative, and it's way too repetitious. Turn off all your notifications on your phone. All those beeps and buzzes and things, they take away your focus from the most important things in your life, including your work and your family and your relationships. You'll be shocked at how much more productive you will be. And periodically, just turn it off completely. Turn off your phone completely and put it away for a couple hours while you focus. And especially during meetings with the people, or whether it be social or professional. Don't look at your phone or computer for at least an hour before bedtime. You've heard about the blue light issues. It's true. But more importantly, the content. You're probably looking at social media or watching TV or doing something. Don't do that before you go to bed. It just fills your head with stuff that you don't want to think about while you're sleeping. Read a book. Read something that's positive and uplifting. Go to bed early. Get up early. Getting up early is one of the greatest things and decisions I've ever made in my life. I didn't like getting up early as a kid. And so getting up early has been something I've had to learn and adapt to, but get the best sleep you can. Try to learn something new and unrelated to your job each day. Be curious. Spend time connecting with the people who are most important in your life, or should be, and find time to play. Seek out the unexpected. You might find new sources of joy. Meditation, prayer, breathing with intention will help you become more present and intentional, which should produce more peace in your life. And finally, there is a magic pill, and it is called gratitude. I recommend journaling a half a dozen things you're grateful for each day. Don't say the same things every day. Think about it. Be thoughtful. Be meditative about what you're thankful for, the simple things that you can be grateful for. If you don't have time to do these things for yourself, then you're robbing yourself, your family, your team, and your best self. So be your best self. Be the best leader you can be. You will have more stamina and get more done. Thanks for letting me chat a little bit about leadership. Here's some of the references, the books that I've read that I found to be informative in my search for trying to be a better leader. And I think you'll find them to be very interesting as well. Thanks, Carrie, and thank you to all you who have joined us.
Thank you, Bruce. That was amazing. We only had a couple of questions during. One person wanted to know if the Rangers went down with you.
If the what?
If the Rangers went down with you on that climb.
Oh, no, they didn't. No, we did it by ourselves. And again, if we'd have had ropes, if we'd have had, which we didn't need because we had other equipment, but they had nothing. And so we didn't have the Rangers. They stayed up there with the person who was on the ledge, even though they couldn't get to him. They directed the Sikorsky helicopter to where they were. Now they came down later on their own, but yeah, I can still remember vividly the Ranger looking at me and say, "You guys can take him down, right?" And I thought, well, I guess we can, and we did, and it was an unusual experience, but really a good one. It was
Did any of
very
your
good.
team, did any of your team get to go back to the summit of Mount Whitney?
Yeah, so a number of us immediately started providing first aid to the one individual in particular. And literally, as I said, he had his feet in my armpits for an hour and a half. So I stayed with him, and as did a couple of others, where they melted water for him so he could drink. They provided some food and nourishment and other warmth. We did have a number of our people who did summit the mountain, and it was a wonderful experience for them, and we're so happy for them, and could not be more excited that they were able to do that. So yes.
And then there's another question here. Sounds like a good challenge. What are you planning for your next challenge?
Well, I do want to go back to Whitney and actually hit that peak. My next challenge, that's a really good question. I do want to do Rainier at some point. I'll never do an Everest. It's just too problematic in so many ways. But my interests are so wide and varied. When he says, "What's my next challenge?" There is a lot of new challenges. One of my next challenges is actually starting a new business. So that's one of my next challenges. And one of my next challenges is being more present with my grandchildren. I have 20 of them. And that's a huge challenge, to be present with them and to be a great grandfather, not a great grandfather, but a more wonderful grandfather. I'm not ready to be a great grandfather yet. So I have a lot of energy, a lot of drive still in me, and it's the kind of thing that I would love to be able to help and mentor others who are on that journey. I've had some great experiences in my life in a variety of fields, and I enjoy doing some of that with Gonzaga University. I mentioned Dr. Popel was on our line here. I mentor a group in Europe that does simulations of NATO, the G20, and foreign relations and the foreign affairs councils. We did our first one of those virtually this year because of the pandemic, and it involves mostly European young professionals and graduate students, but also some mid-level, mid-career professionals from the United States as well.
All right. And then we have, there are a couple of people who have said, "You have truly motivated me as a business owner to make necessary changes." And well said, Bruce, developing global leaders. So I really appreciate your time. And I know it was a little rough at the beginning, but boy, when we got into it, it was.
I got to get that solved. I just did one of these a couple of weeks ago in Europe, and it worked out fine. So I don't know what was different on this one, but I very much apologize for that,
Well,
that hiccup in the beginning.
I appreciate you being here and for your thoughts on leadership and how we as business leaders can become more of a leader, not only in our own organizations, but in our community. I think that's one of our goals is as a chamber in the South County, is to come together and to be leaders and to show our community that there is hope and that there are opportunities still waiting here, even in the crisis. So I really appreciate your words today.
Is Springville part of the South County? I'm just checking.
Yes, it's Springville, the three chambers that are on today: Springville, Mapleton, Spanish Fork, Salem, our chamber, and then Pace and Santaquin. So 3 chambers.
Well, I had to ask that because my wife is a native of Springville. So she was a Red Devil. And so we enjoy that area very much.
Oh, well, terrific. Was there any last minute questions? Otherwise, we'll do the drawing for our next prize. Heather?